All right, VFX fans, get ready, because we're diving headfirst into Unity's VFX Graph.
It's time to make some magic happen.
Yeah, like when you see those crazy effects in games and you're like, whoa, how'd they do that? Explosions, magic spells, even that satisfying gooey splat you get sometimes.
Right.
That's the power of VFX. And Unity's VFX Graph is like the magic wand that makes it all possible.
It's true, and the best part is you don't have to be a wizard to use it. I'm kidding. It can seem a little intimidating at first.
But that's why you're here. You're going to be our guide, breaking it all down into like bite-sized pieces. And speaking of guides, I got to give a shout out to the definitive guidebook. Seriously, this thing is packed with examples, swirling galaxies, interactive goo the works. But before we get ahead of ourselves.
Let's start with the basics.
Exactly. So the book keeps mentioning these two things, VFX graph assets and VFX components. Can you explain that? What's the difference and why should we care?
Sure. So think of it this way. An asset is like the blueprint for your effect.
Okay.
It's like the secret formula for the perfect pizza.
I like where this is going.
Right. And the component, that's the actual pizza you bake using that recipe.
Got it.
You're putting that pizza, that effect, right there in your game world.
So like I could have one awesome explosion asset and reuse it all over my game just by tweaking it a little bit each time.
Exactly. That's the beauty of this whole asset-based workflow. It saves you so much time.
And keeps things organized, right?
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to building these assets, it can seem a little daunting at first, but honestly, it's pretty elegant once you get the hang of it.
Okay, elegant. Now you've got me intrigued. Break it down for me.
Okay, so imagine a recipe, right? But instead of ingredients, you have these things called systems, contexts, and blocks.
Okay.
The systems are like the main sections of your recipe. So you've got your ingredients list, the instructions, and then maybe like the plating suggestions at the end.
Okay, I'm following so far.
Good. Then you've got contexts. Contexts break those sections down into individual steps. So chopping veggies, preheating the oven, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So where do the blocks come in?
The blocks are where the magic happens. They're like the individual actions within each step. So add a pinch of salt, adjust the oven temperature, that sort of thing. Each block does a specific thing.
So I'm picturing this flow, right? Like I'm moving down my recipe step by step. Is that how the VFX graph works?
Exactly. It's all about data flow. It mostly moves vertically from top to bottom and executes each block in sequence, but it gets even more interesting. There's also this horizontal flow. We call that the property workflow.
Ooh, property workflow. Sounds fancy.
It is pretty cool. It gives you crazy control over those individual actions. So imagine you want to change the color of some flames based on, I don't know, the player's health, or you want to make an explosion bigger based on the distance of the impact.
That is powerful.
Right. That's the property workflow. It's one of the things that makes the VFX graph so incredibly powerful.
Okay, this is awesome. I'm ready to dive into the nitty-gritty, but before we do, I got to ask about a few other terms the book mentioned. Blackboards, properties, and operators. What are those all about?
Think of those like your sous chefs. They all have special roles to play, helping you refine your visual masterpiece. But don't worry, we'll unpack them all a little later.
All right, you've successfully baited the hook, but we're going to have to take a quick pause here, listeners. Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. So we've got our systems, our contexts, our blocks.
Yeah.
Basically all the ingredients for some killer VFX. But like a kitchen full of ingredients doesn't make a meal, right?
Exactly. You got to bring those ingredients to life. And that's where attributes and events come in.
Okay, attributes, events. I'm liking the sound of this already.
So attributes, think of those as like the personality of your particles. They determine how they move, their color, how big they are, even how long they last.
So if I want like a really cool looking fireball, attributes would be how I don't know, make it look all like fiery and stuff.
Exactly. You can even add randomness because in real life, like fire isn't perfectly uniform.
True, true. It flickers, it dances. So attributes can help us capture that natural, organic look.
Exactly. Now, events are how you make those effects really interact with your game.
Ooh, tell me more.
So say you want an explosion to go off when the player hits a button. That's an event. Or maybe you want sparks to fly when a sword hits a shield. Another event.
So events are all about timing and interaction.
You got it. Actually, there's a great example of this in the definitive guidebook, the bonfire example.
Oh yeah, the bonfire. Even though it's a simple effect, it uses some pretty clever tricks, like those noise and randomness blocks.
Yeah, those are super important for making effects look more natural.
I gotta admit though, the names are kind of funny. Noise. Who wants a noisy bonfire?
Right. But noise in VFX is actually a good thing. It's all about adding those subtle variations, like that make things look more random and organic.
So it's like adding those little imperfections that make things look more realistic.
Precisely. You can apply noise to all sorts of things. Position, color, size, and it makes a huge difference.
I can imagine. Now, the book also mentions these things called flip books. Is that like what it sounds like? Like those little animation books we had as kids?
Yeah, exactly like that. It's a way to create animations using a sequence of images.
Interesting. So it's like creating a tiny movie for each effect and then playing it back really fast.
Exactly. And it's actually super efficient, especially for effects like fire, smoke, explosions, things that would normally require a ton of individual particles.
So it's a good way to keep things running smoothly, even on like mobile devices.
Exactly. And it can still look incredibly impressive.
Okay, so far so good. But we need more than just good-looking effects, right? They have to behave realistically too.
Exactly. You don't want
Mm.
things just floating around randomly. You need physics.
Okay, so how does that work in the VFX graph?
Well, there are a bunch of ways to simulate physics, things like wind, collisions, even drag, to make things look like they're moving through the air.
So I could like make sparks fly off in different directions depending on the angle of impact, or make smoke rise realistically from a fire.
You got it. VFX physics gives you that extra level of realism and control.
This is blowing my mind. We've got attributes, events, physics. I feel like we're building up to something really big here.
Oh, we definitely are. Just wait till you see what we can do with mesh sampling. That's where things get really interesting.
VFX enthusiasts, welcome back. I hope you're ready for the grand finale because we're about to unlock the ultimate VFX secrets, mesh sampling and skinned mesh sampling.
This is where things get really exciting.
Yeah, we're talking about effects that can interact directly with our game world, right?
Exactly. Imagine this. An explosion that doesn't just happen near a wall, but actually creates cracks and makes dust billow out from the impact point.
Oh, okay, that's next level. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit. What exactly is mesh sampling? The name makes it sound a little intimidating, to be honest.
It's all about tapping into the structure of your 3D objects.
Okay.
So you know how every 3D object is made up of this mesh, like a bunch of points and edges all connected?
Yeah, I've heard that term before, mesh.
Right. So mesh sampling lets us use that mesh to control our effects. We can say, hey, I want particles to spawn right here on this specific part of this object.
So instead of just having a magic spell like floating around a sword, I could make it look like it's actually coming from the sword itself.
Exactly. Or think about a meteor hitting the ground. With mesh sampling, you could have dirt and debris flying out from the exact points of impact. It looks so much more dynamic.
Okay, that makes sense. But you also mentioned something called skinned mesh sampling. That sounds even more intense. Does that have something to do with, like, characters? Because if we can have effects that are tied to, I don't know, a moving character.
You're right on the money. Skin mesh sampling takes everything we can do with regular mesh sampling, but applies it to animated characters and creatures.
So, like, imagine a fire-breathing dragon. Every time it exhales, we could have smoke pouring out of its nostrils. Or a character that leaves a trail of icy particles wherever they walk.
Exactly. It's perfect for creating these really immersive, believable effects that move with your characters.
That is so cool. And to think we can do all of this with the VFX graph.
You've got it.
It's amazing, how much control Unity gives us. And they make it seem almost easy. Wait, maybe not easy, but definitely approachable, even for someone like me who's still learning the ropes.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to be a coding wizard to create some pretty incredible effects.
Right. It feels like magic, but it's really not. Speaking of which, our trusty definitive guide keeps reminding us about a really important topic: optimization. Because what good is a mind-blowing effect if it makes our game run slow, right?
Oh, absolutely. Optimization is key, especially when you're dealing with particles and complex setups like skinned mesh sampling.
So it's kind of a balancing act, right? We want the coolest visuals possible, but we also don't want to kill our game's performance.
Right. Luckily, Unity gives us tons of tools and options for optimization. We can adjust the size of our textures, control how many particles we're spawning. We can even tweak how those particles are being rendered.
So many options. I guess the key takeaway here is don't be afraid to experiment.
Exactly. Dive into those settings, see what works best for your specific game and what you're trying to achieve.
I'm so ready to get started. This whole deep dive has been one giant aha moment. From systems and context to mesh sampling and beyond, we've covered so much ground.
And we've only scratched the surface, really.
I know, right? The world of VFX is massive, but with everything we've learned today, I feel like we've got a good foundation. So to all our listeners out there, don't be afraid to experiment. Open up Unity, play around with the VFX graph, see what kind of magic you can create. And remember, the most important thing is to have fun. Until next time, happy VFXing, everyone.